Yorkshire, September 1818. The autumn rain fell in relentless sheets against the windows of the modest cottage on the edge of Harrogate, each drop a tattoo against the glass, measuring out the 6 years she had been in hiding. Inside, she sat at a worn writing desk, her fingers trembling as she read the letter that would shatter the fragile sanctuary she had built for herself and her children. The seal bore the crest of the Duke of Claremont, a symbol she had not seen since the day she had fled London, with nothing but her unborn children and the weight of her grief. Now, after years of silence, after building a life from ashes and determination, the past had found her. Her sons, Thomas and William, played quietly near the fire, their dark hair and grey eyes mirror images of the father they would never remember. At 6 years old, they knew nothing of their true heritage, nothing of the ducal blood that ran through their veins. Vivienne had kept them hidden, protected, loved. And now the Duke of Claremont had returned from the wars and discovered their existence. If stories of mothers who would sacrifice everything to protect their children move your heart, subscribe now and join us on this journey. You will not want to miss what happens next. The words on the page blurred as tears threatened to fall. Lord Dominic Hargrave, 10th Duke of Claremont, requested her immediate presence at Claremont Hall in Derbyshire. The tone was formal, imperious, utterly devoid of warmth. He made no mention of negotiation, no acknowledgment of her years of sacrifice. Simply a command to appear with his brother's children within the fortnight. Vivienne set the letter aside with hands that had learned to be steady through adversity. She had been 23 when her beloved Edmund died at Waterloo, his final letter arriving 3 weeks after the news of his death. In it, he had begged her to seek protection from his family, to claim her rightful place as his widow. But Edmund had not known his family as she did. Lady Henrietta Hargrave, Edmund's aunt and the Duke's formidable relative, had made her position abundantly clear during that single terrible meeting 6 years ago. Her secret marriage to a younger son with no fortune and no prospects was no marriage at all in the eyes of the ton. Vivienne, the daughter of a country vicar with nothing but her education and her pride, would never be accepted. And her children, if she dared to claim them, would be taken from her and raised as Hargraves, with no memory of their mother's love. So Vivienne had disappeared. She had travelled north under an assumed name, had taken a position as a governess in a merchant's household, and had raised her sons in quiet obscurity. She had taught them Latin and Greek, history and mathematics, had instilled in them honour and kindness. She had given them everything she possessed except the truth of their birthright. The clock on the mantel chimed the hour, pulling her from memories that still had the power to wound. Mrs. Crawford, the elderly widow who assisted with the children, appeared in the doorway with her usual quiet efficiency. "The boys should have their supper soon, ma'am," she said gently, her keen eyes noting Vivienne's distress. "Is there trouble?" Vivienne inclined her head, her smile merely a tightening of her lips. "Nothing that cannot be managed, Mrs. Crawford. Thank you." But as she watched her sons laugh together over their game of soldiers, Vivienne knew that everything was about to change. The Duke of Claremont had discovered the existence of his heirs, and the law would favour him absolutely. A widow had no legal rights over her children if a male relative with sufficient rank chose to claim them. She could refuse his summons, could flee further north, perhaps to Scotland. But such an action would brand her sons as fugitives, would taint them with scandal before they were old enough to understand. No, she would go to Claremont Hall. She would face the Duke and his formidable family, and she would fight with every weapon at her disposal to keep her children safe. 3 days later, Vivienne stood before the imposing facade of Claremont Hall, her sons clutching her hands with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The journey from Yorkshire had been long and uncomfortable, the hired carriage ill-suited for such a distance, but they had arrived, and now there was no turning back. The great house rose before them like a fortress of privilege and power, its Palladian architecture speaking of generations of wealth and influence. Vivienne had seen it only once before, on the day she had married Edmund in the small chapel on the grounds. That ceremony, conducted by a sympathetic curate with only 2 servants as witnesses, had been the happiest moment of her life and the beginning of all her sorrows. The massive oak doors opened, and a butler of intimidating formality emerged to escort them inside. Vivienne straightened her spine, squeezed her son's hands reassuringly, and stepped across the threshold into the marble entrance hall that seemed designed to remind visitors of their insignificance. Mrs. Sinclair and Master Thomas and Master William Hargrave, the butler announced to the empty air, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. His Grace will receive you in the library. They followed the servant through corridors lined with portraits of Hargrave's past, each face seeming to judge her presumption in returning to this place. The library, when they reached it, was a cathedral of books, the scent of leather and old paper mingling with the faint smoke from the fireplace. And there, standing before the fire with his back to the room, was the Duke of Claremont himself. Dominic Hargrave turned as they entered, and Vivian felt her breath catch despite her determination to remain composed. She had seen him only once before, years ago, at a distance during her courtship with Edmund. Time and war had transformed the elegant lord she remembered into something harder, more formidable. His dark hair, touched with silver at the temples, was longer than fashion dictated. His grey eyes, the same shade as her son's, held a weariness that spoke of battles witnessed and comrades lost. He was tall, imposing in his simple but perfectly tailored coat, and there was a stillness about him that suggested a man who had learned to conserve his strength for the moments when it truly mattered. "Mrs. Sinclair," he said, his voice deep and measured, "thank you for responding to my summons." Vivian curtsied, a gesture that felt like surrender, while her sons bowed with the awkward formality of children mimicking adult behavior. "Your Grace," she replied, keeping her voice steady through force of will. "May I present your nephews, Thomas Edmund Hargrave and William James Hargrave?" Dominic's gaze moved to the boys, and something shifted in his expression, pain perhaps, or recognition. He stepped closer, and Vivian had to resist the urge to pull her children behind her. "They have Edmund's eyes," he said quietly, almost to himself. Then, louder, addressing the boys directly, "I am your Uncle Dominic. Your father was my brother, and he was the finest man I've ever known." Thomas, ever the bolder of the twins, spoke up. "Mama says Papa was a hero, that he died fighting for England." "Your mother speaks the truth," Dominic replied, and there was approval in his tone that surprised Vivian. "Edmund died at Waterloo serving with honor. You should be proud of him." "We are," William added softly, leaning closer to Vivian's side. The Duke studied them a moment longer, then gestured to the butler who had remained by the door. "Mrs. Crawford is waiting in the nursery wing. Please escort the young masters to her. I wish to speak with Mrs. Sinclair privately." Vivian's heart clenched, but she bent to kiss each boy's forehead. "Go along, my darlings. I shall join you shortly." When the door closed behind her sons, the silence in the library became oppressive. Dominic moved to a side table where crystal decanters glinted in the firelight. "May I offer you refreshment? You must be fatigued from your journey." "I would prefer to discuss the matter that brought me here, Your Grace," Vivian said, her voice sharper than she intended. "My sons and I have traveled a considerable distance. I would know your intentions." He turned to face her fully, and she saw the flash of something in his eyes, respect perhaps for her directness. "Very well. Let us speak plainly, Mrs. Sinclair. You have kept my brother's children hidden for 6 years. You have denied them their birthright, their family, their rightful place in society. I would know why." The accusation, delivered with such calm certainty, ignited the anger Vivian had suppressed for half a decade. "Denied them?" she repeated, her composure fracturing. "I have given them everything I possess. I have worked myself to exhaustion to provide for them, to educate them, to keep them safe and loved and whole. Do not speak to me of denial, Your Grace, when your family made it abundantly clear that neither they nor I were welcome here. You make serious accusations. To whom did you apply for assistance?" "Lady Henrietta Hargrave," Vivian said, the name tasting of bitterness. "Your aunt." "I came to London when I discovered I was with child, 3 months after Edmund's death. She received me in her home, listened to my situation with what I foolishly believed was sympathy, and then informed me that my marriage would never be recognized by the family, that if I attempted to claim my children as Hargraves, they would be taken from me, and I would never see them again." She watched the Duke's jaw tighten, saw his hands clench briefly before he regained control. "And you believed her? I was 23 years old, Your Grace. A widow with no family of my own, no fortune, no influential connections. Yes, I believed her. The law would have supported her claim absolutely. What choice did I have but to protect my children the only way I could? Before Dominic could respond, the library door opened without ceremony. A woman entered with the confidence of one who had never been denied access to any room in her life. Lady Henrietta Hargrave, elegant and imperious at 60, swept into the library with her pale blue gaze fixed on Vivienne like a hawk sighting prey. "Dominic," she said without preamble, "I was not informed you had invited this person to Claremont Hall. Surely such a matter should have been discussed with the family first." "This person is my brother's widow and the mother of his children," Dominic replied, his tone cooling noticeably. "She requires no invitation to enter her son's rightful home." Henrietta's lips thinned. "Her alleged sons, you mean? We have only her word that Edmund married her, only her claim that these children are legitimate. A woman of her class would say anything to secure a connection to this family." The insult struck like a physical blow, but Vivienne refused to flinch. She had endured worse and survived. "I have the marriage lines," she said evenly, reaching into her reticule to produce the carefully preserved document. "Signed by Edmund, witnessed by 2 servants, and performed by Reverend Michaels in the chapel on these very grounds. I also have Edmund's letters, including his final correspondence in which he acknowledged his children and expressed his love for them." She extended the papers to Dominic, pointedly ignoring Henrietta's outraged expression. The Duke examined the documents with the thoroughness of a man accustomed to detecting deception. When he looked up, there was a new quality to his regard. "These appear authentic," he said quietly. "Edmund's hand is unmistakable." "They are forgeries," Henrietta insisted, her voice rising. "This woman is a fortune hunter who has fabricated evidence to ensnare you into providing for her bastards. Dominic, you cannot possibly be considering acknowledging them." "I am considering the facts before me, Aunt Henrietta," Dominic replied, his voice dropping to a dangerous softness that made even Henrietta pause. "And I find myself curious about certain other facts. Mrs. Sinclair claims she applied to you for assistance 6 years ago. Is this true?" Henrietta's hesitation lasted only a moment. "She may have called upon me. I receive many petitioners and cannot recall every unfortunate widow who seeks charity." "You told me my marriage would never be recognized," Vivienne said, her voice trembling with suppressed fury. "You told me my children would be taken from me if I attempted to claim them as Hargraves. You sent me away with nothing, knowing I carried Edmund's heirs, knowing I had no means to support them. I did what was necessary to protect this family from scandal," Henrietta replied coldly. "Edmund's foolish attachment to a vicar's daughter was an embarrassment we could not afford to acknowledge. You should be grateful I allowed you to slink away with your dignity intact." The cruelty of it, spoken so openly after all these years, left Vivienne momentarily speechless. But Dominic stepped forward, and there was something in his expression that made Henrietta take an involuntary step backward. "Leave us," he said quietly. "Now." "Dominic, you cannot possibly mean to—" "I said leave us, madam. This conversation is concluded." Henrietta drew herself up, her face mottled with rage, but even she could not mistake the steel in her nephew's voice. She departed with a rustle of silk and barely suppressed indignation, the door closing behind her with excessive force. In the silence that followed, Vivienne found herself trembling. The confrontation had drained her more than the entire journey from Yorkshire. "Sit down," Dominic said, his tone gentler than before you collapse." She wanted to refuse, to maintain her dignity through sheer stubbornness, but her legs would not support her pride. She sank into the nearest chair, accepting the glass of brandy he pressed into her hands. His fingers were surprisingly warm, a stark contrast to his cold authority. "I must apologize," he said, settling into the chair opposite hers, "for my aunt's behavior, for the treatment you received when you sought our protection, for every moment of struggle you have endured, because my family failed in its duty to Edmund's widow and children." Vivienne stared at him, uncertain whether to trust this unexpected sympathy. "Your apology, while appreciated, does not address the present situation, Your Grace. You summoned me here for a reason. What do you intend regarding my sons? Dominic leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. The facts are these. Thomas and William are Edmund's legitimate children and the only surviving male heirs of the Hargrave line. My older brother died childless 3 years ago, and I have no children of my own. The succession of the dukedom depends upon your sons. They are 6 years old, Vivian protested. Surely the succession can wait until they are grown. Life is uncertain, Mrs. Sinclair. I learned that lesson well enough on the battlefields of the peninsula. The future of Claremont must be secured, and that requires your sons to be raised here, educated as befits their station, and prepared for the responsibilities they will one day inherit. There it was, the truth she had dreaded since receiving his letter. He meant to take her children from her. No, she said, the word emerging as both plea and defiance. Your Grace, I understand the legal realities. I know you have the power to claim custody of them, but they are my sons. I have been both mother and father to them, have sacrificed everything to keep them safe and loved. Do not ask me to surrender them. I beg you. Dominic studied her with those penetrating grey eyes, and she saw calculation there, the mind of a strategist weighing options. I am not without sympathy for your situation, Mrs. Sinclair. You have clearly been a devoted mother, and the boys are well-mannered and intelligent. Edmund would have been proud of them. But the law is clear, and even if it were not, I have responsibilities to my family name that supersede personal sentiment. Vivienne felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. She would not weep before this man, would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Then tell me plainly what you propose, she managed. Will I be permitted to see them, or do you intend to erase me from their lives entirely as your aunt would prefer? I propose a solution that serves all parties involved, Dominic said, and there was something in his tone that made her look up sharply. A marriage between us would legitimize your position, provide your sons with both parents under one roof, and secure the succession without the taint of scandal. You would be the Duchess of Claremont, with all the protections and privileges that title affords. Your sons would have their mother, and I would have my heirs properly situated. The proposal struck her with the force of a physical blow. Marriage. To this man she barely knew, this austere duke, who looked at her with calculation rather than affection. You speak of marriage as though it were a business arrangement, she said quietly, because it would be precisely that. A marriage of convenience and mutual benefit. I require heirs. You require protection and security for your sons. Affection, while pleasant, is not necessary for such an arrangement to succeed. The casual dismissal of love, of the passionate devotion she had shared with Edmund, made something inside Vivienne rebel. But she was not a naive girl anymore. She was a mother fighting for her children's future. And if I refuse? Dominic's expression did not change. Then I will petition the courts for full custody of Thomas and William. My claim is unassailable, Mrs. Sinclair. They are Hargraves, the last of Edmund's line, and they belong at Claremont Hall. You may refuse my proposal, but you cannot prevent me from claiming my brother's sons. She had known it would come to this, had known from the moment she received his letter that her choices were limited. But hearing it spoken so plainly, with such cold certainty, made her feel as trapped as she had 6 years ago when Henrietta had threatened to take her unborn children. You give me no choice at all, she whispered. I give you the best choice available, Dominic corrected. Marriage to me ensures you remain in your sons' lives. Refusal guarantees you will lose them entirely. The decision is yours, but I will require your answer before you depart Claremont Hall. Vivian set down the glass of brandy with hands that had finally stopped trembling. 6 years of sacrifice, of struggle, of building a life from nothing, and it had all led to this moment, a choice that was no choice at all. May I have time to consider? You may have until tomorrow evening, Dominic replied, rising from his chair with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to command. I will have Mrs. Crawford show you and the boys to your chambers. The family dines at 8, but I do not expect you to join us tonight. You have had quite enough of the Hargraves for one day, I think. The unexpected consideration, the acknowledgment of her exhaustion and distress caught her off guard. She stood as well, uncertain what to say, how to navigate this impossible situation. "Your Grace," she began, then faltered. Dominic paused at the library door, looking back at her with an expression she could not quite read. "My brother loved you," he said quietly. "His letters spoke of little else in the months before his death. Whatever else transpires between us, Mrs. Sinclair, know that I honor his choice and his memory. The woman who inspired such devotion deserves better than the treatment you received from my family. I cannot undo the past, but I can offer you a future that includes your children. I hope you will consider that when making your decision." He left her then, alone in the library with her tumultuous thoughts and her breaking heart. Through the tall windows, she could see the grounds of Claremont Hall stretching into the gathering dusk. Somewhere in this vast house, her sons were exploring their heritage, innocent of the storm gathering around them. Vivienne pressed her palm against the cold glass, feeling the autumn chill seep through. She had fought so hard to keep them safe, to give them a childhood free from the machinations of the ton. And now she would have to surrender that quiet life, would have to enter the viper's nest of London society as the Duchess of Claremont, knowing that Henrietta and others like her would never accept her. But she would do it. For Thomas and William, she would marry the cold Duke with his strategic mind and his emotionless proposal. She would become what she had never wanted to be, a wife of convenience, a mother tolerated rather than celebrated, a duchess in name only. The thought should have broken her. Instead, Vivienne felt something harden inside her chest. She had survived 6 years of poverty and struggle. She had buried the love of her life and raised his children alone. She had endured Henrietta's cruelty and society's scorn. She could survive this too. The following morning brought the crisp brightness of early autumn, sunlight streaming through the windows of the guest chamber, where Vivienne had spent a largely sleepless night. Her sons had adjusted to Claremont Hall with the resilience of children, delighted by the grand rooms and extensive grounds. They knew nothing of the bargain being negotiated for their futures, nothing of the sacrifice their mother was preparing to make. Mrs. Crawford arrived with breakfast on a tray, and news that the Duke requested Vivienne's presence in the morning room at her earliest convenience. The formality of it all, the careful distance maintained through servants and scheduled appointments, felt suffocating after years of simple, direct living. She dressed with care in her best morning gown, a modest creation of grey muslin that had seen better days but was meticulously maintained. Looking at her reflection in the dressing-table mirror, Vivienne saw what the Duke must see. A woman of 29 who had lived hard and showed it, her face too thin, her hands roughened by work no lady should have performed, her wardrobe hopelessly provincial. How strange that she would become a duchess looking like this. The morning room, when she found it, was less imposing than the library. Sunlight flooded through French doors that opened onto a terrace, and the furnishings spoke of comfort rather than intimidation. Dominic stood by the windows, still in his riding clothes, and turned as she entered. "Mrs. Sinclair, I trust you slept well?" The polite fiction made her smile despite herself. "As well as could be expected, Your Grace, given the circumstances." "Indeed." He gestured to a small table set for two, breakfast laid out with quiet elegance. "Will you join me? We should discuss the arrangements if you have reached a decision." Vivienne took the offered seat, accepting coffee from his own hand rather than waiting for a servant. The gesture was unexpectedly considerate, and she found herself studying him with new attention. In daylight she could see the lines of strain around his eyes, the tension he carried in his shoulders. This was a man who had borne heavy burdens and learned not to show the weight of them. "I have considered your proposal," she said, meeting his gaze directly, "and I will accept it with certain conditions." Dominic's eyebrow rose slightly, but his expression remained neutral. "I am listening. First, my sons must never be separated from me. Whatever arrangements you make for their education and upbringing, I will be fully involved in those decisions. They are Hargraves, but they are my children first." "Agreed," Dominic said without hesitation. "You have proven yourself a capable mother. I have no intention of interfering with that relationship." Vivienne felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. "Second, I will require your protection from Lady Henrietta and any other family members who might seek to undermine my position. I will not be subjected to the treatment I received 6 years ago." "You have my word," Dominic replied, his tone hardening. "As my wife, you will be Duchess of Claremont, and anyone who treats you with disrespect will answer to me. That includes my aunt." "And third," Vivian continued, her voice dropping, "I ask that this marriage be one of mutual respect, even if it cannot be one of affection. I understand the practical nature of this arrangement, but I will not be treated as a mere convenience or an obligation to be endured." Dominic set down his coffee cup with careful precision, his grey eyes searching her face. "You have very little faith in my character, Mrs. Sinclair. I have very little experience of men who marry for anything other than fortune or desire, Your Grace. You offer neither love nor passion, only pragmatism. Forgive me if I seek assurance that pragmatism includes basic courtesy." For the first time since she had met him, Dominic's austere expression softened into something that might have been the ghost of a smile. "You are remarkably direct for a vicar's daughter. I am remarkably tired of pretense, Your Grace. 6 years of struggle will do that to a person." He nodded slowly, as though coming to some internal decision. "Very well. I accept your conditions, and I will add one of my own. This marriage will be real in every sense, Mrs. Sinclair. I will not take a wife only to maintain a separate existence. We will live as husband and wife. We will present a united front to society, and in time, I hope we will achieve the respect you request, if not the affection you rightly observe is absent at present." Vivian felt heat rise in her cheeks at the implication of his words. A real marriage. She had not allowed herself to consider that aspect of the arrangement, had not imagined sharing a bed with this reserved, controlled man who looked at her with strategic assessment rather than desire. "I understand," she managed, though her voice emerged less steady than she would have liked. "Do you?" Dominic leaned back in his chair, regarding her with that penetrating gaze. "I am offering you more than protection for your sons, Mrs. Sinclair. I am offering you a true partnership, within the bounds of what is possible between two people who barely know each other. I have spent 7 years at war, watching men die for causes they barely understood. I learned there that time is precious and should not be wasted on half measures. If we are to marry, let us do so properly." There was something almost gentle in his tone, a humanity beneath the austere exterior that surprised her. Perhaps the cold Duke was not quite as cold as he appeared. "When would you wish the ceremony to take place?" she asked, accepting the reality of her situation with the same practicality that had kept her alive these past 6 years. "As soon as the banns can be read. 3 weeks, perhaps 4. That will give you time to acquire a suitable wardrobe and prepare the boys for the change. I thought we might marry here, in the chapel where you wed Edmund. It seems fitting." Vivian's throat tightened at the consideration implicit in the suggestion. To marry in the same place she had pledged her love to Edmund felt both painful and right, a way of honoring the past while stepping into an uncertain future. "That would be acceptable," she said quietly. Dominic rose from his chair and crossed to a writing desk, returning with a small wooden box. He placed it on the table before her and opened it to reveal a magnificent ring, a square-cut sapphire surrounded by diamonds, set in gold that had clearly been crafted generations ago. "The Claremont betrothal ring," he said. "It has been in the family for 200 years. It should fit, but we can have it adjusted if necessary." Vivian stared at the ring, knowing that accepting it would seal her fate irrevocably. But she had already made her choice. For her sons, she would become the Duchess of Claremont, would wear this symbol of a union built on necessity rather than love. She extended her left hand, and Dominic slid the ring onto her finger with steady hands. It fit perfectly, the weight of it both beautiful and binding. "There," he said softly. "You are now betrothed to the Duke of Claremont. I will make the announcement to the family this evening and send notices to the London papers tomorrow. Are you prepared for the attention this will bring?" "No," Vivian answered honestly, "but I shall endure it nonetheless." Dominic surprised her by taking her hand, the one now bearing his ring, and raising it briefly to his lips in a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy. "You are stronger than you know, I think. Edmund chose well, even if his family failed to recognize it." Before Vivian could respond, a commotion in the hallway announced the arrival of her sons, their voices raised in excitement as they called for their mother. Dominic released her hand and stepped back, his expression shifting back to its customary reserve. But she had seen the warmth in his eyes and found it oddly reassuring. Thomas and William burst into the morning room with the enthusiasm of children who had discovered paradise. They spoke over each other, describing the stables and the horses and the kind groom who had promised to teach them to ride properly. "Mama, there are 12 horses," Thomas exclaimed, "and Uncle Dominic says we may learn to ride them all." William, more observant than his brother, noticed the ring on Vivian's finger. "Mama, what is that? It is very pretty." Vivian glanced at Dominic, who gave her the slightest nod of encouragement. "Your Uncle Dominic and I are to be married," she said gently, "which means we will all live here together at Claremont Hall. Would you like that?" The boys exchanged glances, their young faces processing this information with the seriousness it deserved. Then Thomas, ever the one to voice what his brother felt, asked the question that mattered most. "Will we still be together, you and William and me?" "Always," Vivian promised, pulling them both into her embrace. "We will always be together." Over their heads, she met Dominic's gaze and saw understanding there. He knew what he had purchased with his pragmatic proposal, not just heirs for his dukedom, but a family bound by love and loss, and the determination to protect what mattered most. For the first time since receiving his summons, Vivienne allowed herself to hope that perhaps this arrangement might become something more than mere convenience. Perhaps in time, the cold duke might prove to have a heart, after all. The weeks that followed brought changes so rapid and comprehensive that Vivienne sometimes felt she was living someone else's life. Dressmakers arrived from London, filling her chamber with bolts of silk and muslin in colours she had not worn since Edmund's death. A lady's maid was assigned to her, a quiet woman named Sarah, who managed the miraculous transformation of a provincial widow into something approaching ducal elegance. The boys thrived in their new environment, their days filled with riding lessons and explorations of the vast estate. Dominic proved unexpectedly patient with his nephews, taking time from his duties to teach them about the land they would one day inherit, the responsibilities that came with privilege, the importance of honor and duty. Vivienne watched these interactions with complicated feelings. The Duke was kind to her sons, respectful toward her, and scrupulously correct in all his dealings. Yet there remained a distance between them, a formality that felt increasingly artificial as their wedding day approached. She saw him most often at dinner, the two of them dining alone since Henrietta had removed herself to her own estate, in a fury after the betrothal announcement. Those meals passed in polite conversation about the boys' progress, estate matters, preparations for the ceremony. They spoke of everything except what lay beneath the surface, the reason they were marrying, the absence of love, the uncertainty of what would transpire after they exchanged vows. The boys' adjustment, too, had its own complexities. Thomas, ever the bolder, finally asked Dominic directly after a riding lesson, "Are you trying to make us forget, Papa?" Dominic had stopped, his expression serious. "Never," he said, meeting the boy's gaze. "Your father was a hero. I am here to protect you as he would have, and to raise you in his honor." It was a conversation that cemented the boys' trust more than any gift could have, and it prepared the way for Dominic's own question. It was during one such dinner, a week before the wedding, that Dominic surprised her by asking a personal question. "What was my brother like?" he said, setting down his wineglass. "I know the Edmund who went to war, the younger son who resented his lack of prospects. But you knew a different man, I think. Tell me about him." Vivienne had not spoken of Edmund in years, had kept her memories locked away where they could not wound her. But there was genuine interest in Dominic's face, and she found herself wanting to share this part of herself with the man who would soon be her husband. "He was joyful," she said quietly. "Even when circumstances were difficult, even when we knew your family would never accept our marriage, Edmund found reasons to laugh. He made me believe that love was enough, that we could build a life together despite the obstacles. And yet he left you," Dominic observed, not unkindly. "He went to war knowing you would be unprotected if he fell." "He went because he believed in duty," Vivienne replied, feeling the old pain rise in her chest. The same sense of honor that drew you to the military drew him as well. I could not ask him to stay, even knowing the risks. It would have broken something essential in him. Dominic nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. I envied him, you know, his ability to love so completely, to commit himself so entirely to someone else. I never possessed that capacity. The admission, spoken with such matter-of-fact acceptance, broke something open in Vivian. Perhaps you never allowed yourself the opportunity, she suggested gently. Love requires vulnerability, and I suspect you learned long ago to protect yourself from such exposure. He looked at her with those penetrating grey eyes, and for a moment she saw past the reserve to the man beneath, a man who had lost his elder brother, his younger brother, countless comrades in arms, a man who had learned that caring too deeply led only to pain. You see more clearly than is comfortable, Mrs. Sinclair, he said, but there was no reproach in his tone. Vivian, she corrected, if we are to be married in 7 days, perhaps we might dispense with formality when we are alone. Vivian, he repeated, and the sound of her name in his voice sent an unexpected warmth through her. And you must call me Dominic, though I warn you, I am not accustomed to such intimacy. Neither am I, she admitted. Not anymore. But perhaps we might learn together. Dominic regarded her for a long moment, then raised his wineglass in a small salute. To learning, then, and to the hope that this marriage may become more than either of us expects. Vivian lifted her own glass, meeting his gaze with growing conviction. To hope, she echoed, and for the first time since accepting his proposal, she meant it. The wedding took place on a crystalline October morning, the chapel on the Claremont grounds filled with autumn light and the subtle fragrance of hothouse roses. The ceremony was small, attended only by necessary family members and a few close associates of the Duke. Henrietta was notably absent, having sent word that she was indisposed, a slight that surprised no one. Vivian stood before the altar in a gown of ivory silk, far grander than anything she had worn for her first wedding, but somehow less meaningful. Sarah had dressed her hair with pearl combs, and the Claremont sapphire gleamed on her finger, but she felt like an impostor playing at being a bride. Until she saw Dominic waiting for her at the altar, and something in his expression steadied her. He looked at her not with indifference or calculation, but with a quiet intensity that spoke of commitment and resolve. This was a man who had given his word, and he would honor it. The vicar's voice echoed through the chapel, speaking the ancient words that would bind them together. Vivienne made her responses with a voice that did not waver, feeling Thomas and William watching from the front pew, their young faces solemn and hopeful. When Dominic slipped the wedding band onto her finger, his hand was warm and steady, and his eyes held hers with an unspoken promise. I, Dominic Edward James Hargrave, take thee, Vivian Margaret Sinclair, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. The word love hung in the air between them, both promise and question. Could this man who claimed no capacity for such emotion learn to feel it? Could she, with her heart still loyal to Edmund's memory, open herself to the possibility? She spoke her own vows with equal gravity, and when the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Dominic kissed her with gentle formality, a brief press of lips that was more contract than passion, but held the seed of something more. They emerged from the chapel as the Duke and Duchess of Claremont, and Vivian felt the weight of that transformation settle upon her shoulders. She was no longer a struggling widow, no longer the mother fighting alone. She was a duchess now, with all the protection and peril that title entailed. The wedding breakfast was an intimate affair, and Vivienne found herself studying the small gathering of Dominic's friends and associates. These were men who had served with him in the peninsula, who spoke of battles and comrades with the easy camaraderie of shared hardship. They treated her with courtesy, these weathered soldiers, but she saw the curiosity in their eyes. What had drawn their austere commander to marry a country widow with no connections? Colonel Marcus Fairfax, Dominic's closest friend, provided the answer during a quiet moment when the Duke was occupied with the boys. He has not been the same since he returned, Fairfax said, watching Dominic with concerned affection. The war took something from him, some capacity for lightness. But watching him with those boys today, I saw a glimpse of the man he used to be. You have given him more than heirs, Your Grace. You have given him a reason to live beyond duty. The words should have comforted her, but instead they highlighted the responsibility she now carried. Dominic had married her to secure his succession, but what if he needed more than that? What if he needed someone who could heal the wounds war had left on his soul? She was not sure she possessed the strength for such a task. Her own heart was still scarred, still grieving. How could two broken people hope to build something whole? As if sensing her thoughts, Dominic appeared at her side, offering his arm with formal courtesy. "Shall we walk in the gardens? The weather is fine, and I think we could both use respite from observation." Vivienne accepted gratefully, allowing him to guide her through the French doors onto the terrace. The autumn gardens were beautiful in their decline, roses fading into winter dormancy, leaves turning gold and crimson against the evergreens. They walked in silence for a time, following gravel paths between sculpted hedges, and Vivienne found the quiet companionable rather than awkward. This man did not require constant conversation, did not need her to fill every moment with words. "You are thinking of Edmund," Dominic said eventually, and it was not a question. "How did you know?" "Because I would be thinking of him too, were our positions reversed. You married the man you loved in this chapel. Now you have married a stranger in the same place. The contrast must be painful." His understanding surprised her. "I do not mean to dishonor you with my memories." "You do not dishonor me," Dominic replied, stopping to face her fully. "Edmund deserves to be remembered. He deserves to have his sons know what manner of man their father was. I would not ask you to forget him, Vivienne. I ask only that you allow me to earn my own place in your life, however small that place might be." The humility in his voice, the acknowledgement of his limitations, touched something deep in Vivienne's carefully guarded heart. This proud man, this duke with his reserve and his restraint, was offering her honesty instead of pretense. "I will try," she said softly. "That is all I can promise." "It is enough," Dominic assured her, and there was warmth in his eyes that she had not seen before. "We have time, Vivienne. Neither of us is going anywhere." He was right, of course. They were bound now, for better or worse, and they would have to find a way to navigate this strange marriage built on necessity and hope. As they continued their walk, Dominic began to speak of the estate, of his plans for the tenants, of improvements he wished to make. Vivienne listened and found herself drawn into the conversation, offering suggestions based on her years of managing a household on minimal resources. He listened to her ideas with genuine interest, seeking her opinion on matters she had assumed would be solely his domain. It was a small thing, this sharing of thoughts and plans, but it felt like the beginning of partnership. Not love, perhaps, not yet, but something that might grow into respect and genuine affection given time. The afternoon light was fading when they returned to the house, their sons running to meet them with tales of the wedding cake and the games they had played with the Colonel's children. Dominic scooped William up with easy strength, while Thomas grabbed his mother's hand, and for a moment they looked like a real family. The thought both comforted and terrified Vivienne. She had not expected to want this, to crave the possibility of happiness with this reserved man, but watching him laugh at something William said, seeing the genuine affection in his expression, she felt the first crack in the walls she had built around her heart. Perhaps against all odds, this marriage of convenience might become something more. That night, Vivienne sat at the dressing table in the Duchess's chambers, a suite of rooms connected to the Duke's by a shared sitting room. Sarah had helped her prepare for bed, brushing out her hair and dressing her in a nightgown of fine lawn that seemed designed for a bride rather than a widow entering a pragmatic arrangement. She heard the door to the sitting room open and Dominic's footsteps crossing the floor. Her heart began to race, uncertainty flooding through her. They had not discussed the intimate details of their marriage, had not spoken of expectations or obligations. She knew what was expected of a wife, but the thought of sharing a bed with this man she barely knew filled her with complicated emotions. Dominic appeared in the doorway, still dressed but with his cravat loosened, his coat discarded. He looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "May I come in?" The courtesy of asking when he had every right to enter steadied her. Of course. He crossed to the window, putting distance between them, his hands clasped behind his back in a military stance that spoke of discomfort. "I want you to know," he began, his voice careful, and she noted a flicker of something vulnerable in his eyes, not just consideration, but perhaps uncertainty. "I have no expectations of you tonight, or any night until you are ready. This marriage was not of your choosing, and I will not impose myself upon you simply because I have the legal right to do so." Vivienne stared at him, surprised by the consideration. Most men would not feel the need to ask permission of their wives. "I am not most men," Dominic replied quietly. "And you are not most wives. You have sacrificed much already, Vivienne. I will not add to that burden by demanding intimacy you are not prepared to give." She studied him in the candlelight, this complicated man who hid such unexpected gentleness beneath his austere exterior. "And if I were to ask you to stay, not out of obligation but out of curiosity about what we might become to each other?" Dominic turned to face her fully, and she saw desire flicker in his grey eyes, quickly controlled but unmistakably present. "Then I would stay, and I would do my utmost to deserve the trust you placed in me." Vivienne rose from the dressing table and crossed to him, her heart pounding but her resolve clear. She was tired of being afraid, tired of protecting herself from the possibility of caring. This man had shown her kindness, had honored her sons, had offered her a partnership when he could have simply taken what he wanted. She could not love him, not yet, perhaps not ever. But she could choose to move forward, to embrace the life she had been given, rather than mourning the one she had lost. "Then stay," she said softly, placing her hand over his heart and feeling its rapid beat. "And let us discover what we might build together." Dominic covered her hand with his own, his expression shifting from surprise to something warmer, more vulnerable. "Are you certain?" "I am certain that I am tired of being alone," Vivienne replied honestly. "I am certain that you have been kinder to me than I had any right to expect. And I am certain that if we are to make this marriage real, we must begin somewhere. Let it be here, on our wedding night, with honesty between us." He drew her closer, his other hand rising to cup her face with unexpected tenderness. "Then let us begin," he murmured, and kissed her with a passion that surprised them both. The weeks that followed their wedding brought unexpected contentment to Claremont Hall. Vivienne settled into her role as Duchess with more ease than she had anticipated, discovering that managing a grand estate was not so different from managing a modest household, merely on a larger scale. The servants, initially reserved with the new Duchess who had appeared so suddenly, warmed to her practical approach and genuine concern for their welfare. Her sons flourished under Dominic's guidance, their education expanding beyond what she could have provided alone. They learned to ride with growing confidence, studied with tutors Dominic had carefully selected, and absorbed the lessons of honor and responsibility their uncle-turned-stepfather imparted with patient firmness. But it was in the quiet moments that Vivienne found the greatest transformation occurring. The reserved duke who had proposed a marriage of convenience revealed himself, layer by careful layer, to be a man of unexpected depth. He had a dry wit that emerged during their evening conversations. He read poetry in Greek and discussed philosophy with genuine passion. He remembered small details of what she told him and acted upon them, filling the library with books on subjects she had mentioned finding interesting, arranging for her to visit tenant families when he noticed her restlessness. And at night, in the privacy of their shared chambers, Dominic proved to be an attentive and surprisingly tender husband. The physical intimacy between them grew from tentative exploration to genuine passion, and Vivienne found herself responding to him in ways that both thrilled and frightened her. She had not expected to desire this man, had not imagined that pleasure could exist without the deep emotional connection she had shared with Edmund. Yet here she was, discovering that different did not mean lesser, that partnership could become affection, that respect could kindle into something warmer. It was a cold November evening when the fragile peace they had built began to crack. They had been married nearly a month, and Dominic had suggested they open Claremont House in London for the little season. It was time, he argued, for Vivian to take her place in society as his Duchess, for Thomas and William to be formally presented to the ton. Vivian had agreed, though the prospect filled her with dread. She knew what awaited her in London: the scrutiny, the gossip, the judgment of a society that would never forget her humble origins. But she also knew it was necessary. Her sons deserved their rightful place, and she would not let fear prevent them from claiming it. They arrived in London on a grey afternoon, the streets slick with rain, and Claremont House rose before them like a fortress of privilege. Vivienne steeled herself for the battles ahead, remembering Dominic's promise to protect her from those who would seek to undermine her position. What she had not anticipated was that the greatest threat would come not from strangers, but from within the family itself. Lady Henrietta Hargrave was waiting in the drawing room when they arrived, her presence a clear challenge to Dominic's authority. She stood as they entered, her pale blue eyes sweeping over Vivienne with undisguised disdain. "Nephew," she said, ignoring Vivienne entirely, "I see you have returned to London with your unfortunate acquisition. I hope you do not intend to inflict her presence upon good society." Dominic's expression hardened to stone. "Aunt Henrietta, you will address my wife with the respect due to the Duchess of Claremont, or you will remove yourself from this house immediately." Henrietta's laugh was brittle and cold. "Your wife? This opportunistic creature who ensnared poor Edmund with false promises and now seeks to elevate herself through you? London will never accept her, Dominic. She will be the scandal of the season." "Then London will learn to accept what I have chosen," Dominic replied, his voice dangerously quiet. "And you, Aunt, will either support my Duchess or find yourself permanently excluded from this family. The choice is yours." Vivian watched the confrontation with a sinking heart. She had known Henrietta would oppose her, but the venom in the older woman's voice spoke of a hatred that went deeper than mere social snobbery. "You have made a grave error," Henrietta said, her composure cracking to reveal fury beneath. "That woman and her bastards will destroy everything our family has built. I tried to prevent this disaster 6 years ago, and I will not stand by while she ruins us now." "My sons are legitimate Hargraves," Vivian said, finding her voice despite her fear. "Edmund married me legally, and they are his rightful heirs. Whatever else you may say about me, you cannot deny them their birthright." Henrietta turned on her with eyes like chips of ice. "Cannot I? We shall see what society has to say when they learn the truth of your situation. A secret marriage performed hastily and witnessed only by servants. Children born suspiciously soon after Edmund's death. A widow who disappeared for years only to resurface when it became convenient. I wonder how many will believe your tale when they hear mine." The threat was unmistakable, and Vivian felt ice settle in her stomach. Henrietta meant to destroy her reputation, to cast doubt on her son's legitimacy, to turn society against them before they even had a chance to establish themselves. "Enough," Dominic said, stepping forward with controlled fury. "You will leave this house now, Henrietta. And if I hear even a whisper of the slander you threaten, I will ensure you are cut from every respectable drawing room in London. You may be my aunt, but I will not allow you to harm my family." Henrietta drew herself up, her face mottled with rage. "You do not have the influence you believe, Dominic. I have spent 30 years cultivating connections in this city. One word from me, and your precious Duchess will be ruined." "Then speak that word," Dominic challenged, "and discover exactly how much influence a duke carries when his honor has been challenged. I promise you, Aunt, you will not emerge victorious from such a contest." For a moment the standoff held, tension crackling between uncle and aunt. Then Henrietta gathered her cloak with sharp movements and swept toward the door. "This is not finished," she said, pausing at the threshold. "You have made your choice, Dominic. Live with the consequences." When the door closed behind her, Vivian found herself trembling. Dominic crossed to her immediately, his hands settling on her shoulders with steadying warmth. "She cannot harm you," he said firmly. "I will not allow it." But Vivian knew better. Henrietta Hargrave was a formidable woman with decades of social power at her disposal. If she truly wished to destroy Vivian's reputation, she possessed the means to do so. "What will we do?" she whispered. Dominic tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. We will face society together, as we should have done from the beginning. We will attend every ball, every rout, every gathering of importance. We will present a united front, and we will dare anyone to question my choice of wife. You are the Duchess of Claremont, Vivian. No one, not even my aunt, can change that fact. His confidence steadied her, but she could not shake the fear that Henrietta's threats had planted. She had fought so hard to protect her sons, to build a life for them, now that safety was threatened by forces beyond her control. That night, lying in Dominic's arms after he had made love to her with unusual tenderness, Vivienne finally voiced her deepest fear. What if she succeeds? What if society refuses to accept me, refuses to acknowledge Thomas and William? I could not bear to see them suffer for my choices. Dominic's arms tightened around her. Then we will weather that storm together. I have faced cannon fire and cavalry charges, Vivian. I will not be cowed by gossiping matrons and spiteful relations. Trust me to protect you. Trust me to protect our sons. Our sons, not his nephews, not her children, but theirs together. The words settled over Vivian like a benediction, easing some of her fear. I do trust you, she said quietly. More than I thought possible when we began this arrangement. She felt him smile against her hair. And I find myself caring more than I believed myself capable of caring. You have changed me, Vivian. You and the boys have given me something I thought lost to me forever. I will not surrender that easily. In the darkness, Vivian allowed herself to hope that his affection was becoming something deeper, that their marriage of convenience might truly transform into something real. But she also knew that the battle ahead would test them in ways neither had anticipated. Henrietta Hargrave was not a woman who made idle threats, and Vivian would soon discover just how dangerous a determined enemy could be. The little season opened with the Countess of Ravenwood's ball, an event so exclusive that an invitation was considered a mark of supreme social approval. Dominic had secured their inclusion through his title and connections, and he insisted they make their first public appearance there. He had also, he mentioned, invited Colonel Fairfax and several officers who served with Edmund. It is time, he had said, that society heard the truth from those who knew him best. Vivian stood before her looking-glass on the evening of the ball, barely recognizing the woman who stared back. Sarah had outdone herself, dressing Vivian in a gown of deep sapphire silk that brought out the blue in her eyes. Diamonds glittered at her throat and ears, the Claremont jewels that marked her unmistakably as the Duke's wife. Her dark hair was arranged in an elegant style that softened the angles of her face, and for the first time in years, Vivian looked like a woman of consequence. But beneath the finery, she was still the vicar's daughter who had buried her husband and raised her sons in poverty. No amount of silk and diamonds could erase the fear that she did not belong in the glittering world she was about to enter. Dominic appeared in the doorway, resplendent in evening black, and his expression as he looked at her sent warmth flooding through her anxiety. "You are beautiful," he said simply, crossing to her and taking her hands. "Every eye in that ballroom will be on you tonight, Vivian. Let them look. Let them see that the Duke of Claremont has chosen a woman of substance and grace." "I am terrified," she admitted, her fingers tightening on his. "So am I," Dominic replied, surprising her. "I have faced battles that seemed less daunting than navigating the London social season. But we will face it together, and we will emerge victorious. I promise you." The carriage ride to Ravenwood House passed in tense silence, but Dominic kept her hand clasped in his, the warmth of his touch anchoring her. When they arrived, the blaze of lights and the sound of music and laughter spilling from the open doors made Vivian's heart race with renewed panic. But Dominic helped her from the carriage with patient courtesy, offered his arm with steady strength, and guided her up the steps into the lion's den. The ballroom fell silent as they were announced. Vivian felt hundreds of eyes turned toward them, felt the weight of judgment and curiosity settle upon her shoulders. But Dominic stood beside her, tall and commanding, his very presence a shield against the scrutiny. Lady Ravenwood, the hostess, approached with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Your Grace," she said to Dominic, then with slightly less warmth, "Your Grace, to Vivian. How delightful that you could attend. London has been quite abuzz with news of your unexpected marriage." "Indeed," Dominic replied smoothly. "I am fortunate to have secured such a remarkable wife. May I present the Duchess of Claremont, formerly Mrs. Vivian Sinclair, widow of my late brother, Captain Edmund Hargrave." The introduction was deliberate, establishing Vivian's connection to the family through Edmund rather than through Dominic's charity. It was a subtle but important distinction, and Vivian felt a surge of gratitude for his strategic thinking. Lady Ravenwood's smile tightened. "Of course. How tragic about Captain Hargrave. Such a loss for the family." "A loss that has been partially remedied by the discovery of his sons," Dominic continued, his tone brooking no disagreement. "My nephews are the pride of Claremont, and my wife has done an admirable job raising them." Before Lady Ravenwood could respond, a commotion at the ballroom entrance announced the arrival of another guest. Vivian's stomach dropped as she recognized Lady Henrietta Hargrave, resplendent in purple silk, sweeping into the room with her usual imperious confidence. Henrietta's gaze found them immediately, and Vivian saw the calculation in those cold eyes. This was no coincidence. Henrietta had planned to be here, to confront them publicly at their first social appearance. The older woman approached with deliberate steps, ignoring the whispers that followed in her wake. When she reached them, she performed a curtsy so shallow it bordered on insulting. "Nephew," she said to Dominic, then turned to Vivienne with a smile that promised nothing good. "And dear niece, how unexpected to see you here. I was just discussing with Lady Pemberton the most interesting rumours about your marriage. It seems there is some question about the validity of your union to poor Edmund." The gauntlet had been thrown, and every nearby guest strained to hear Dominic's response. Vivienne felt her heart hammering, but Dominic's expression remained icily composed. "I am familiar with no such questions, Aunt Henrietta. My brother's marriage to Vivian was entirely legal and properly witnessed. The church registry at Claremont Chapel contains the record, signed by both parties and the officiating curate. If you or anyone else wishes to examine that evidence, I will gladly provide access." Henrietta's smile hardened. "But the circumstances were so unusual, were they not? A hasty ceremony, performed in secret, followed by the bride's sudden disappearance. One might almost think there was something irregular about the entire affair." "One might think," Dominic replied coldly, "that a woman fleeing from cruel treatment by her husband's family had excellent reason to disappear. But I am certain you know nothing of cruelty, Aunt Henrietta." The barb struck home, and Vivian saw fury flash in Henrietta's eyes. But before the confrontation could escalate further, a new voice entered the conversation. "How fascinating this all is," drawled a gentleman Vivian did not recognize. He was perhaps 40, impeccably dressed, with the languid manner of a practiced rake. The mysterious widow who captured not one but 2 Hargrave hearts. "You must tell us your secrets, Your Grace." The mockery in his tone was unmistakable, and Vivian felt her cheeks flush with humiliation. But before she could respond, Dominic stepped forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "You will address my wife with respect, Viscount Marbury, or you will answer to me. Choose your next words with care." Marbury's expression shifted from amusement to alarm. Clearly he had not expected the Duke to defend his bride so forcefully. "I meant no offence, Your Grace, merely expressing admiration for your choice." "Then express it respectfully or do not express it at all," Dominic replied, his grey eyes like flint. The gathered crowd watched in rapt attention, the scene playing out like theatre. Vivian realized with sudden clarity that this was the defining moment. How Dominic handled this challenge would set the tone for every social interaction to follow. Marbury bowed with exaggerated courtesy, retreating with his dignity barely intact. But Henrietta was not so easily cowed. "How noble of you to defend her, Dominic," she said, her voice pitched to Carrie. "But defense will not erase the questions about those children. Were they truly born in lawful wedlock? Or are they the products of youthful indiscretion that this woman seeks to legitimize through your charity?" The insult was so vicious, so calculated to wound, that Vivian felt tears sting her eyes. But before she could speak, before Dominic could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Lady Henrietta, what a pleasure to see you spreading your particular brand of poison once again." Everyone turned to see Colonel Marcus Fairfax approaching, his military bearing unmistakable even in evening dress. Behind him came two other gentlemen in uniform, clearly officers who had served with Dominic. Fairfax stopped beside the Duke and offered Vivian a bow of genuine respect. "Your Grace, it is an honor to see you again. I had hoped to pay my respects earlier, but I see you have been occupied with more pressing matters." His tone was light, but his eyes held steel as he glanced at Henrietta. Then, in a voice that carried throughout the ballroom, he continued, "I must say, I find it remarkable that anyone would question the legitimacy of Captain Hargrave's children. I served with Edmund for 3 years, and I can attest that he spoke often and fondly of his wife. He showed me her letters, carried her portrait with him into battle. The man was utterly devoted, and his marriage was no secret among his fellow officers." The revelation sent a ripple through the crowd. Vivian stared at Fairfax in astonishment, not having known that Edmund had spoken of her to his comrades. Another officer stepped forward. "Captain Hargrave showed me his son's likenesses," he said. "Miniatures his wife had sent him just before Waterloo. He carried them in his coat pocket, right over his heart. I remember thinking it remarkable that a man could be so proud of children he had never met." A third officer nodded. "And I witnessed him writing his will the night before the battle. He left everything to his wife and unborn children, with explicit instructions that they be cared for should he fall. Those are not the actions of a man in an irregular situation." Henrietta's face had gone white with fury, but she could not argue against the testimony of 3 respected military men. The crowd's sympathy, which had been uncertain, began to shift decisively in Vivian's favor. Dominic placed his hand at the small of Vivian's back, a gesture of support and possession. "It seems, Aunt Henrietta, that your questions have been thoroughly answered. My brother's marriage was real, his children are legitimate, and my wife is exactly who she claims to be. If you persist in spreading slander, you will find yourself answering to more than just my displeasure." Henrietta drew herself up, her composure fracturing. "You are making a grave mistake, Dominic. That woman is not fit to be a duchess, and those children are not—" "Enough." Dominic's voice cut through her words like a blade. "You have insulted my wife for the last time. You are no longer welcome in my home, or in any establishment where I hold influence. Consider yourself cut from this family's society, permanently." The pronouncement sent a shock through the ballroom. To be cut by the Duke of Claremont was social death, a scandal that would follow Henrietta for the rest of her life. She stood frozen, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. "You cannot do this," she whispered. "I am your father's sister." "You are a woman who has brought nothing but pain to this family," Dominic replied, his voice cold with finality. "You turned away my brother's widow when she sought protection. You threatened to take her children. You have spread malicious lies designed to destroy her reputation. I will not tolerate such cruelty, regardless of your connection to me." Henrietta looked around the ballroom, seeking support, but found only averted eyes and uncomfortable silence. No one would openly oppose the Duke, not when he had made his position so clear. With a sound somewhere between a sob and a snarl, Henrietta fled the ballroom, her grand exit marred by tears and humiliation. The assembled guests watched her go with a mixture of satisfaction and unease, knowing they had witnessed something unprecedented. Lady Ravenwood, ever the consummate hostess, clapped her hands with forced brightness. "Well, that was quite dramatic. Shall we have some music? I believe a waltz is in order." The orchestra struck up immediately, and couples began moving toward the dance floor, their conversations buzzing with excitement over the spectacle they had witnessed. Dominic turned to Vivian, his expression softening as he saw the tears streaming down her face. "Are you well?" She nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. He had defended her, had publicly cut ties with his own family to protect her honor. The sacrifice was enormous, and she felt humbled by it. "Dance with me," Dominic said gently, leading her toward the floor. "Let them see that we are united, that their gossip holds no power over us." Vivian let him guide her into the waltz, his arms strong and steady around her. As they moved through the steps, she became aware of the eyes upon them, the whispers that would spread through London before morning. But she also felt Dominic's unwavering presence, his quiet strength anchoring her. "Thank you," she whispered as they turned, "for what you did, for what you sacrificed." Dominic's grey eyes held hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "I sacrificed nothing that mattered, Vivian. Henrietta brought her fate upon herself with her cruelty. You and the boys are my family now. I will always protect what is mine." The possessiveness in his words should have alarmed her, but instead, Vivian felt something warm and precious unfurl in her chest. This man who had married her out of duty and necessity was becoming something more, something vital and irreplaceable. "I think," she said softly, "I am beginning to love you, Dominic Hargrave." He missed a step in the dance, his composure fracturing for just a moment. Then his arms tightened around her, and he leaned close enough that only she could hear his response. "I know I am falling in love with you, Vivienne. Against all expectation, against all reason, you have claimed my heart as completely as Edmund claimed yours." They finished the waltz in silence, but the air between them had changed, charged with possibility and promise. When the music ended, Dominic led her from the floor, and Vivian knew that everything had shifted irrevocably. They had begun as strangers bound by necessity, but in the crucible of society's judgment and family betrayal, they had forged something real and precious, something that might yet become the great love neither had expected to find. The silence in the carriage on their return to Claremont House was a balm after the battle waged in the ballroom. Vivian leaned her head against the squabs, the adrenaline finally fading. Dominic's hand found hers in the darkness, his grip firm. "It is done," he said. She turned her hand to clasp his fully. "We did it," she corrected softly. He raised her hand to his lips, a gesture far more intimate than any public kiss, and said nothing more until they were home. The following week saw Vivian's position in society solidify beyond Henrietta's ability to damage it. The story of the Duke defending his wife against his cruel aunt became the romantic tale of the season, and Vivian found herself the object of curiosity rather than scorn. Invitations flooded Claremont House. Ladies who had been prepared to cut her instead sought her friendship, drawn by the novelty of a duchess who had risen from obscurity through genuine devotion. The fact that Dominic so clearly cherished his wife only added to the romantic appeal. But it was in the quiet moments at home that Vivian felt the deepest change. Dominic had moved beyond courtesy and respect into genuine partnership. This was cemented one evening when, reviewing the estate ledgers together, a task her frugal upbringing had made her surprisingly adept at, she quietly pointed out a long-standing inefficiency in the tenant farm rents. He had looked at her not with surprise, but with a profound, quiet respect for her mind. From that moment, their evenings were spent in true partnership, discussing everything from philosophy to the boys' education. Thomas and William thrived under their parents' united care, their bond with Dominic growing stronger each day. They called him Papa now, with Vivian's blessing, and the joy in Dominic's face when he heard those words never failed to move her. One evening in early December, as snow fell softly outside the windows of Claremont House, Vivian found herself in the library with Dominic, the two of them reading companionably by the fire. She looked up from her book to find him watching her, his expression tender in a way that still had the power to surprise her. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. Dominic set aside his book and crossed to her chair, kneeling beside it with unconscious grace. He took her hands in his thumbs tracing patterns on her skin. "I am thinking," he said quietly, "that I have been given a second chance at life. The war took so much from me, left me hollow and wounded in ways I could not name. I believed myself incapable of the love my brother found with you, but you have proven me wrong, Vivian. You and the boys have healed wounds I thought permanent." Vivian felt tears prick her eyes at the vulnerability in his voice. "You have healed me as well," she replied. "I thought Edmund's death had closed my heart forever, that I would spend my life loving only his memory. But you have shown me that the heart has infinite capacity, that loving you does not diminish what I felt for him." "I do not ask you to forget him," Dominic said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know I am not Edmund, that what we have is different from what you shared with him." "It is different," Vivian agreed, cupping his face in her hands. "But it is no less precious for being so. Edmund was my first love, the father of my children, the man who taught me that devotion could transform everything. You are my second chance, The man who chose me when he had no obligation to do so, who defended me when it cost him dearly, who has given my sons the father they deserve. She leaned down to kiss him, pouring everything she felt into the tender press of lips. When they parted, Dominic rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her skin. "I love you, Vivian Hargrave," he whispered, "not as a duty or an obligation, but as a choice I make every day. You are my Duchess, my wife, my heart's companion. I thank God for the day you came back to Claremont Hall." "And I love you, Dominic," Vivian replied, the words coming easily now, no longer frightening but liberating. "You have given me everything I thought lost. Safety for my children, a place in the world, and most unexpectedly, a love I never thought to find again." They remained there by the fire as the snow fell outside, two people who had found each other through necessity but chosen each other through love. The marriage that had begun as a pragmatic arrangement had blossomed into something neither had anticipated, but both cherished beyond measure. Upstairs, their sons slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and protected. And somewhere in heaven, Edmund Hargrave surely smiled, knowing that the woman he had adored and the children he had never met were safe in the care of a man worthy of their devotion. The season ended with the Claremont family hosting a grand ball on the winter solstice, a celebration of their triumph over scandal and their emergence as one of London's most respected families. Vivian stood beside Dominic to receive their guests, her hand resting in the crook of his arm, the Claremont sapphire glinting on her finger. She had travelled so far from that rainy afternoon in Yorkshire when Dominic's letter had arrived. From widow to duchess, from fear to love, from isolation to belonging. The journey had been difficult, marked by challenges she could never have anticipated. But standing here now, surrounded by the life she and Dominic had built together, Vivian knew that every hardship had been worth enduring. As the orchestra struck up the first waltz, Dominic led her onto the floor, his grey eyes holding hers with the warmth that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. "Happy, my love," he murmured as they began to dance. Vivian smiled, feeling joy bubble up like champagne. "Happier than I have any right to be. You have given me the world, Dominic. You have given me a reason to value that world," he replied softly, "and I will spend every day proving myself worthy of the gift." They danced through the evening, celebrating not just the season, but the miracle of two broken hearts that had found wholeness in each other. And when the last guest had departed and they retired to their chambers, Dominic made love to his wife with a tenderness that spoke of devotion deeper than words. 18 months after that first summons to Claremont Hall, Vivian stood in the nursery of the ducal estate, watching her sons play with their infant sister. Rose Margaret Hargrave, named for the grandmother she would never know, and for the quiet strength of her own mother, slept peacefully in her cradle, oblivious to the extraordinary journey that had led to her existence. Dominic entered quietly, wrapping his arms around Vivian from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. Together they watched their children, this family they had built from necessity and transformed through love. "I have been thinking," Dominic said softly, "that we should commission a portrait, the 5 of us together, to hang in the gallery alongside the other Hargraves." Vivian leaned back into his embrace, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her spine. "That would be lovely, though I still cannot quite believe I belong in such august company." "You belong anywhere I am," Dominic replied firmly. "You are the Duchess of Claremont, the mother of my children, the love of my life. That portrait will show future generations what true devotion looks like, what happens when two people choose love over fear." Vivian turned in his arms, reaching up to kiss him with all the passion and tenderness she felt. When they parted, she saw her own joy reflected in his eyes, the contentment of a man who had found his place in the world. "Come," she said, taking his hand. "The children's governess will be here shortly, and I find myself wanting to steal a few moments alone with my husband." Dominic's smile was warm with promise as he let her lead him from the nursery, down the familiar corridors of Claremont Hall to the suite of rooms they shared. And there, in the afternoon light streaming through tall windows, they celebrated the love that had transformed them both, the partnership that had begun in necessity and bloomed into the greatest joy either had known. Dear listener, perhaps you too have faced moments when the path ahead seemed impossible, when circumstances forced you into situations you never chose. Like Vivian, you may have discovered that sometimes the most unexpected journeys lead to the most extraordinary destinations. Love arrives in many forms at many times in our lives. Sometimes it comes as a storm of passion, overwhelming and all-consuming. Sometimes it grows quietly, a seed planted in necessity that blooms into something beautiful beyond imagining. Neither form is less valuable than the other. Both deserve to be celebrated and cherished. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, remember that your story is not yet finished. The choices forced upon you today may become the blessings you count tomorrow. The person who seems so different from what you imagined might become the very thing your heart has been seeking. Trust in the journey, even when you cannot see where it leads. You are stronger than you know. You are capable of love beyond what you imagine. And your greatest happiness may be waiting just beyond the horizon of your fear. If this story of unexpected love and second chances touched your heart, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to believe in new beginnings. Your support helps us continue creating stories of hope, courage, and enduring love.